And it was only after I'd put my luggage, including my camera bag, into the back of the car and been ushered into the front and we left the security of the airport pickup zone that I kind of thought, something's not right here. I made it to Mexico at 4:30 in the morning, and the first thing that happened to me after going through border security suspiciously quickly and easily, that's a story for another video, but the first thing that happened to me after that was that I was scammed. There's a Dreaming Spanish episode about how not all Mexicans are criminals and that's an unfair stereotype and it's just ridiculous and all that kind of stuff, and I completely agree. But 20 minutes into my trip to Mexico, I had met exactly 3 people there and all of them were in on the scam. So at that point, for my experience, 3 out of 3 Mexicans were criminals. I blame Ben, okay? I'm never putting up with 4 nights of free hospitality and you buying me food ever again, Ben. It's your fault. Ben had told me that Uber was not allowed at Mexico City Airport, like it's banned there. And I don't know how serious that is, okay? I don't know if it's like, oh, it's just kind of frowned upon, or is it a matter of like if I order an Uber, it just won't come, or is it like it will come, but if I'm seen getting in it, I'll immediately be arrested, or will the driver be arrested, or maybe we'll both get arrested together and then interrogated in Spanish. I don't know, but it doesn't sound like the sort of thing that I want to mess around with, especially when I don't use Uber in Australia. I've literally never used Uber here. The first time that I'd ever used that service was the night before to get to San Francisco Airport. In hindsight, obviously I could have just ordered an Uber and hoped that it arrived, right? Like, surely I'm not going to be charged if it doesn't come or I'm not able to get in it or something. But I'm not super familiar with Uber. I'm certainly not familiar with Mexico, and it's 4 in the morning. I'm not awake, so I figure just taxi. But again, and this is getting a little bit stupid now, I know, but I'm not very familiar with taxis either. It occurred to me later that most people are probably much more familiar with taxis than I am because they go out like drinking and clubbing and stuff. I don't do that either, so I don't really use taxi. I should take the time to be clearer about this. When I say I don't really use taxis, I don't use taxis at all. I literally can't remember ever using a taxi as an adult where I was paying. So anyway, I walk out of the airport. I'm wearing a coat that is way too warm because it didn't fit in my luggage, so I had to wear it. And they're taxis, there's hundreds of them. There's so many, and they're pink and white, and they're like 1999 model Chevrolet somethings. They're like the size of a large shoebox, and they're obviously very cheap cars to begin with, and they've all seen like 20 years of abuse on the streets of Mexico City. Although of course they were not 1999 models, they were probably like 2016 or 17 models, but it's just that that's what driving around Mexico City all day does to your car. Like, I wasn't expecting anything different. Like, I know that Mexico is not going to be like Japan or the USA or Australia, right? It's a third world country, let's be blunt. But still, when I saw their taxis, I was like, damn, what do you do to your cars here? I don't really remember how it started, but this guy kind of comes out of nowhere and says like, taxi, you need a taxi? Yes, obviously, right? At this point, I'm not suspecting anything, and of course, there's nothing wrong with him trying to sell me the service that he's got. Like, he's got a taxi, I need a taxi. That makes sense. And then I become aware of like 2 other guys who were like behind me, and they'd also come out of the airport seemingly. And the first guy, the guy who initially asked me if I wanted a taxi, he's kind of put us all together, like we're all part of the same group. And I thought that he had mistaken us for being part of the same group. So I'm like, no somos juntos. Like, I just need to tell him, we're not actually together. Don't think that we're going to the same place or anything. And he's like, no, it's fine. And as green as I may be when it comes to taxis, I get that people can actually share taxis and go to slightly different places. And in theory, if the places are close together or on the way to each other, it should actually make it cheaper, right? But I wasn't sure how he could possibly know that we were going to a similar area, given that no one had communicated any of that information to any other party. So yeah, that probably should have been a warning sign, but you're gonna have to remember through this whole story that like, I've just gotten off a plane, I've had no sleep, it's 4:35 in the morning, something like that. It's my first time speaking Spanish in a real world situation. My brain is running at maximum 40% capacity. And so the driver guy is just like, yeah, that's fine, where are you going? And I showed him Ben's address on my phone, Because I don't know if you've ever read a Mexican address, but I haven't. Not all the way through. I've gotten to like maybe chapter 5 on some of it. They're massive. They are like epic works. And Mexico is big, but it's not that big. Like, I live in a bigger country. I've been in bigger countries. There's no way that all the details on those addresses are actually necessary, but I don't know which ones are necessary and which ones aren't. So I just show him. So he sees the address and he's sort of switching between Spanish and English as I was. And he said something in Spanish that might have been like, yeah, these guys are just going a bit further or something. I'm not exactly sure, but he implied that it was fine. And then he says, I'll go get the car. And he kind of just takes off. Like, he just disappears. He's just gone. Now, you're watching this and you already know that it's dodgy. So you can see the warning signs. But it's like when you watch a horror movie, you think they're an idiot for going into the basement. But like, they don't know that they're in a horror movie. They think it's the cat or something. That's the same with me. I didn't have the danger music, which is to say that all of this seems obvious now, and I should have just walked off or gone and asked if one of the people in the pink taxis was free and I could just jump in that. But at the time, I just thought, oh, his car's obviously like not right here, which is true. What I now think was going on was that he had to kind of minimize the time that he was near the pickup zone of the airport. Why he was doing that, I will give you my theory on later. But it's also not impossible that that's a completely legitimate thing. Like, that would be a thing at Sydney Airport. You can't have your car right outside the pickup zone where it's really, really crowded and just sit there waiting for passengers. That's fair enough. But when he comes back, he's not in like a little cheapo, beaten up pink and white taxi like everyone else. No, he's in like a big, nice new SUV. It's black. It's a real CIA looking thing. And after spending 9 days in Mexico, that fact alone would have set off alarm bells for me, because I know that not many people drive cars that are that big or that new because they're too expensive. So if anyone had sort of approached me and asked me if I wanted help and they were driving something like that, I'd be like, no, thanks, I'll sort it out on my own. But instead, when that car pulled up and he jumped out, I was just like, oh, whoa, okay, that's a bit fancier than I was expecting. And I must admit, I did think, gee, I hope it's not too expensive. But at the same time, I thought, well, there are 3 of us, so that could like offset the cost of it. You idiot. Mainly, I was just grateful that I didn't have to do anything difficult, right? I didn't have to take some kind of weird shuttle bus that only goes every hour, or direct someone in Spanish who didn't have a GPS. Plus, you get that kind of post-airport euphoria, right? You've gotten through, there's no issues with your passport, the airline has not lost your luggage. You just get that feeling like, yes, I'm going to be at where I'm trying to go really, really soon. So like a stupid rabbit hopping gleefully into the fox's mouth, I get in the car. And it was only after I'd put my luggage, including my camera bag, into the back of the car and been ushered into the front and we left the security of the airport pickup zone that I kind of thought, something's not right here. Because I'm in this leather seat in this very fancy interior. Now, I don't like SUVs, they're just not my thing, but I can't deny that it was a nice, luxurious place to be. And as we drove further into Mexico, I'm looking around going, none of the cars here are this expensive. You would have to have like 10 of those other taxis to make up one of these. And I'm thinking, you can't jack up taxi prices enough to cover something like this. There's got to be something else. Am I the something else? And I'm also starting to think a little bit about these 2 other passengers and who they really are, because while the main driver guy was like closing the boot and walking around the car or whatever, I just said to them, just to kind of be friendly, are you guys from the US? Because I'd flown from the US, they'd come out of the airport seemingly. It wasn't a big leap to think that they may have come from the same place. When I asked that, I saw straight away that the guy was not that sure of what I asked him. And for a second, I was thinking like, oh, no, I've got this wrong. They're from Africa. Like, they're black guys, and I figured they're not African American, they're just African. But while I was thinking that, he just kind of looks panicked and then he just goes, oh, no, Asia. And at the stage that I asked them that was before we left the airport, remember, I wasn't suspicious of anything at all. So I had no reason to think that Asia was a suspicious answer. Sure, it was not what I was expecting, but I didn't think anything of it at all. It was only once we'd started moving that my red-eye flight brain that was still probably a little bit jet lagged from Australia was starting to kind of go, some of this is just a bit weird. For starters, I've just put a pretty valuable load of stuff into the boot, including my camera, and I'm regretting not keeping it on me, which, to be fair, would have been physically impossible for my main luggage, but at least I could have kept my camera on me. I probably should have done that. But more to the point, I'm becoming more and more suspicious that this is actually not a taxi. And not that that's like the worst thing in the world, but if this is not a taxi, that means I've just jumped in a random car with 3 unknown dudes in a country that I'm totally unfamiliar with. And it's hard to describe a mental process when it's so kind of scattered, and it's not like any one thing just tipped me off. But another thing arousing my suspicion was the fact that the driver was talking to me as much as he could in English, which was nice of him. I figure a regular taxi driver would do the same thing if they spoke English. But increasingly, he was talking to the other passengers in Spanish, and they seemed less and less interested with maintaining the illusion that they were actually from Asia or that they were tourists of any kind. My Spanish isn't great, but to the best that my ear could discern, it was Mexican Spanish that they were speaking. They were not Spanish as second language speakers. They were native Spanish speakers, and as far as I could tell, Mexican native speakers. So I was like, these guys are Mexican. Now, this is the last channel in the world on which you should hear, well, they sounded native, therefore they must have been. Like, I've got a whole video on that. But at the very least, it seemed like it wasn't their first trip to Latin America. But also, these 3 guys have probably gotten the impression that I don't understand Spanish enough that it matters what they say. But of course, I do. Now, my spoken Spanish isn't very good, and that probably gave them a false impression of how competent I was in Spanish, but I was good enough to be able to tell a lot of what they were saying, and it was pretty obvious that they knew each other. And to be fair, that bit would be obvious to anyone. People who know each other talk to each other differently to the way you talk to strangers. So whether you spoke Spanish or not, you'd be able to tell that, and it seemed increasingly like they didn't really care if I knew that. So now, still not totally panicking, I'm starting to think this isn't ideal, because at the very least, I've been tricked on that front. They are definitely not tourists from Asia who just happen to be going the same way as I am. They know the driver, and they are Mexican, so something weird is going on. But I'm trying not to be alarmist, right? I'm trying to be calm, and I'm trying to find reasons that this won't be a full-on kidnapping. It feels very strange to even entertain the thought, even if kind of jokingly, that you may have been kidnapped. It feels quite egotistical, actually, because it's like, important people get kidnapped. Why would they bother with me? But at the same time, I'm thinking, well, this is not a real taxi. These are not real passengers. And they've probably pinned me as a first-timer in Mexico correctly. And they're probably wondering if I have enough money to make this worth their while, even if it's just a robbery. Like I said, it's hard to describe a thought process, particularly when it's got all these rational and irrational ideas flying around, and I was very tired, so I don't remember it all. My rational brain is thinking, this actually could be a kidnapping. Like, there's no reason that cannot have happened, and you've just straight up volunteered for it. But on the other hand, my emotional brain is just going, that's not possible. It doesn't happen. Dude, you have not been kidnapped. Like, people in Mexico are allowed to have nice cars too. Get over yourself. But ultimately, it doesn't even matter at this stage, because there's very little I can do. 5 a.m, there are very few cars on the road. There are some red lights just on timers, but because there are no other cars at the other points of the intersection, they don't stop for the red lights either. So we're never stopping. And even if we were to stop, I would then have to like take the risk that it was something more dangerous than I thought it was, and jump out and bail and leave my stuff, which would then guarantee that I lost my stuff, which was one of the things I was fearful of in the first place. And what would you say about that later to like insurance or anyone else? Is like, yeah, I jumped out of the car and left my stuff there. It's like, okay, why? Because I thought I might have been being kidnapped. Okay, again, Why? Well, because the guys said they were from Asia, but they sounded Mexican, and also the car had leather seats. Like what? Basically, I was nowhere near confident enough that that was the scam. I knew that there was something going down. Like there was definitely something wrong with this trip at this point, but I had to just hope that I was able to get out of it without my family having to pay a ransom and with my stuff intact maybe even. But I did employ one safety measure. Now, I'm not a gangster, okay? I have no idea whether this would do anything at all, but I felt like it couldn't really hurt. So I pulled out my phone, which thankfully the SIM for had moved over to Mexico automatically. Shout out to my wife for finding that plan, which has full North American coverage. Very useful. And I turned location history on. And I kind of made sure that the guy could see what I was doing without wanting to be too obvious about it. Now, I already had location services on, so you could see in real time where I was if you were, say, my wife or my son, but that's different to location history. Location history, I just had to hope does what it says it does, and I had to hope that the guy would see that and understand what I'd done. And I also started keeping a more obvious eye on Google Maps, just the normal like GPS sat-nav function, which was taking me to Ben's address. I already had been looking at that just to make sure we weren't going like a bunch of random routes to something that wasn't actually very far away, but I made it like less discreet now. I was like, yeah, I'm watching where we're going as well as you following on your map. Now, of course, I could have just straight up told him like, hey buddy, I'm turning location history on, so my wife and Google know where I've been, so don't even think about kidnapping me or anything. But like I said, I wasn't actually confident that anything was happening at all other than it not being a real taxi. I was starting to get very confident of that. But who wants to be the person who's like, hey, don't kidnap me, right as they pull up to your door and sort of go, that'll be 300 pesos. So you pretty much know how it turns out, right? You know that I didn't get kidnapped or ransomed because I'm here talking to you. But I also don't think that we were always going the most direct route to Ben's place, because when he first put that in, I saw that it said 16 minutes once we started driving, and it took more like 26 minutes. And there was nothing at all to make us take longer. And I think once or twice very early on in the trip, he did turn like the way that it said not to. I think I saw him do some things, so he was at least extending the trip. But we got there in the end. Now, I'm not going so far as to say that that means that there was definitely something more nefarious in mind, that they just decided to play it safe once they saw me pull my gangster move of turning location history on or whatever. I think it's possible that there was like a low-key robbery or some kind of scam involved. Highly unlikely. Either way, I'll never know. Was it a scam? Well, yeah, I think it was, but you be the judge, because he looks at the dash cluster, like presumably the odometer, I don't know what, and puts something into his FPOS terminal, which he then shows me, and it's 1,200 pesos, which is about $70 US. Now, technically, he gave me the service I asked for, right? And I'd never asked for a price or even an estimate, which is, by the way, why I wish my Spanish had been better, because it wasn't that my Spanish was bad per se. It was more just that I wasn't confident enough in it to want to talk more than I had to. Like, I knew straight away, as soon as he offered me, like, do you need a taxi? I should have asked something. I should have tried to find out more information. But like I said, I had that post-airport euphoria, and that on top of the fact that it would have been easier if I'd spoken better Spanish, you just take the easy way out and you say, yes, I need a taxi. And in this case, that was an expensive decision, an expensive bit of laziness. Now, was it the most expensive mistake ever? No. Where I now believe that the scam lay is in the fact that this was not a real taxi service. Like, this is just an unchecked random ride, and there's probably fees and taxes and stuff that real taxis have to pay that these guys would not have to pay. And the other bigger problem is that you're completely at their whim as to what constitutes a reasonable fee, right? Like, if he had asked for 5,000 pesos, what could I do? Who am I going to appeal to if it's not even a legitimate business? And it was only when I came to pay that I had the presence of mind to think about any of this stuff. Obviously, I'd been suspicious in the car, but at the moment that it came to pay, I started to realize what was wrong with this whole scenario. And that's when I became very insistent on the last thing that I could possibly fight on, which was that he showed me that it was pesos, because the symbol for pesos is this. And as you know, that's the symbol for dollars. And by the way, can we do something about that? Every currency should have its own symbol. And yes, I include the Australian and Canadian dollars in that too. But pesos are not even called dollars. And at least at the moment, Canadian and Australian dollars are kind of within some reach of the US dollar, whereas pesos are worth 6 US cents. They should not have the same symbol. And I guarantee you that somewhere, someone has been scammed by a trick that involved pesos versus dollars. So now, having seen the price, everything is confirmed for me that it's like, okay, this is actually a scam. I can't do anything about it, but the one thing that I do want to do is have the guy show me that it's pesos, because it just says $1,200 and I'm just expected to put my card into it. So I'm like, no, I'm going to need to see that it's pesos. And he's like, oh, well, yeah, you know, it's a Mexican machine. So what? What does that mean? It can't charge in any other currency? This is an Estonian card, and this can pay in every currency on earth. So I don't see why I should just trust that your machine can't have another currency put in it, especially given what you've given me to work with on trust. And he tried like going back to show me that it's like enter an amount in pesos or something, but it never actually says any of that. So he just says, well, I can't do anything. You're just going to have to take my word for it. And this may have been one of the pettier things I've done in my adult life, but I just decided, no, I'm not going to just take your word for it. So I'm going to pay, and then we're going to sit here until I get a notification from the Wise app on my phone of the amount that I have paid. And he's going like, oh no, that'll take hours. It won't go through straight away and stuff. And I know that that's not true. I know that it'll be like 30 seconds, but I was still like, well, I hope you have all day, because we are not moving until I see that it's pesos. But this time I've managed to confuse him. He's like, what? He doesn't know what Wise is. He doesn't know how I could possibly check what currency it'll be in. He's telling me like, oh, it'll charge you in US dollars, but it'll be like less. And I'm like, no, if you charge me in pesos, it'll come out of the pesos that are in my Wise thing. Like it's going to work, dude. But it's going to need to be in pesos. So I'm trying to convince him, don't try f***ing around. Now, the fact that he was so resistant to me checking anything makes me think that maybe there was more to the scam than that. Because who wouldn't make the scam 18 times as much if that's how simple it was? If there was no way that I could do anything about it after that day, who wouldn't do that? But at the same time, I really have no evidence for him ever having charged anything other than pesos. I don't even know that his machine could do that, like he said. But, you know, I had reason to doubt him. I don't think it was an unfair thing to demand, given that that is the symbol for pesos, which it shouldn't be. Someone somewhere, probably lots of people, have been a victim of that. I guarantee you it's happened. But at least I got to show that I was right, that it would only take a few seconds when I paid and just sat there, and he's there like, oh, I don't know, this could take hours. And then I was like, bing, and showed him like, there it is, 1,200 pesos. If you appreciate that segue should have been a really good segue into a Wise sponsorship, but it wasn't because I'm not actually sponsored by Wise, maybe consider becoming a member of the Tim Tam Cartel. That's what I call my YouTube channel members. You get some extra videos and stickers and all that cool stuff. Maybe become a member because I'm not sponsored by Wise. That's a very weird bit of logic, but anyway, become a member. So yeah, 1,200 pesos is what it cost me, which actually isn't that much. But to put that in perspective, in Mexico, my Uber back to the airport when I left, which was like 3 times as far, it was 250 pesos. So yes, it definitely was a scam. And to add to that, it wasn't a real taxi. So he's probably skirting some fees and stuff elsewhere. And I think that's what the whole I'll go and get my car thing was about. Because if he had gotten out of that car and said, do you want a taxi? I might have been suspicious straight away. Like, hang on, that doesn't look like a taxi. But once you've agreed to have a taxi and, you know, he's sort of organized the lift for you, and then he goes and gets his car, once you see the car, you're less likely to sort of... So I think that's the main reason that the car is like not immediately in your line of sight. But I also think it's to help with the whole police and airport security situation who could be like, oh, there's that guy who's not a real taxi again. At the same time, it does make me laugh a little bit that this somewhat elaborate scam involving what I think were 2 paid actors adds up to less than 100 Australian dollars. In Sydney, if you got a taxi at 5 in the morning and took it a similar distance, it could easily be about $80 or $90 anyway. So basically I just paid Australian prices in Mexico. And it's also significantly less than I saved by staying with Ben and another friend later in the week, rather than getting like even cheap motels would have added up to more than that. So it's not really that big a deal. And initially I was going to say, look, there's no real lesson or takeaway here. Like, I'm obviously the one who needs the lesson in something. I'm sure some of you are watching this thinking, yeah, well, you were asking for that, buddy. But I think there is a lesson that is maybe not so obvious, which is that if you get somewhere that you've been particularly looking forward to, especially after an all-night flight or just a really long trip, you may let your guard down more than you think, even if you think that your guard is up. I thought my guard was up because I know that Mexico City is not going to be Oslo, right? I'm not naive, but my guard being up actually led me to be too agreeable to the first option that came along because I thought that it seemed like the safe option, right? I wanted to minimize the time that I was standing around at the airport looking like I didn't know where I was going, and so I just agreed to something. And as I've shown you, that could have been quite bad because I didn't actually check who I was getting in the car with. So if you're going somewhere, even if it is Oslo or Melbourne or something, still have a plan for what you're doing when you get to the airport. Now, initially I did, actually. To be fair, I did have a plan. My friend was going to pick me up, but then his car was broken down and he couldn't get it back in time. It was still at the mechanic. Once I found that out, I should have investigated the taxi situation further because I didn't even consider this until later. But if we don't count the Uber the night before, it was my first time ever paying for a taxi, and it was my first time ever in Mexico City. Probably not a great combination. So anyway, that was my first hour in Mexico City, and I was there for 9 days. So look forward to more videos coming at you very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.